Welcome, everyone. Thanks for being here. My name is Sam Schmitz, and I'm with Mom's Clean Air Force. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm based in DC. We're super excited for this webinar for everyone to be able to take some action and feel empowered to make your voice heard within the EPA and within our government right now, as it's a particularly important time. So I'll just run through the agenda real quick, and then we'll hear from some exciting speakers, including Congresswoman Ansari and our wonderful partners. But first, Mom's Clean Air Force is a community of over 1.5 million moms, dads, and caregivers united against air pollution and climate change. So we wanted to do this webinar to create a really diverse and intergenerational set of groups and voices, making sure that everyone is making their voice heard at the EPA, because obviously climate impacts all of us and it impacts our future especially. So we want to make sure that young people know about this, and older folks and parents and everyone that has a stake in our future knows about this. We also know there's a lot of momentum in the movement right now, and that a lot of new people want to be able to take action. So hopefully that this allows us to teach everyone how to write public comments. Sometimes I'll call them testimony. Testimony is just the version of giving public comments where you speak them in front of EPA. But hopefully this is empowering and democratizes the regulatory system in places like EPA. And just think about this as some time you're spending with us tonight, the next 75 minutes, as an investment into the future that we all want to create and the legacy that you want to leave for future generations. And next, I'm very excited to introduce Congresswoman Ansari. We're honored to have her tonight and to hear some words from her. She represents Arizona's 3rd Congressional District, right around Phoenix. She was a former UN climate advisor, and she's also the youngest woman in Congress. And while obviously that's incredible and inspirational, it also means she's going to have to deal with the impacts of climate change and our government's actions far longer into the future than some of our other lawmakers will. But with that said, Arizona is on the front lines of climate impacts, facing record-breaking heat, wildfires, drought, but it's also a national model for clean energy implementation, from heat-resilient infrastructure in Maricopa County to new electric school buses funded by the bipartisan infrastructure law. But rescinding the endangerment finding, which is what we'll be talking about tonight, would undermine the Environmental Protection Agency's ability to keep this momentum going in states like Arizona and to protect public health in this especially warming state. I know the Congresswoman is going to talk more about that, so I'll hand it over to let her tell us a few more words.
Thank you so much to everyone at Mom's Clean Air Force and to all of the other wonderful partners across the climate and public health space for making this happen. I'm Congresswoman Yasamin Ansari, representing Phoenix, Glendale, and Guadalupe in the U.S. House of Representatives. I'm proud to be on the Natural Resources Committee and to have been selected ranking member of the Energy and Mineral Resources Subcommittee. On the committee, we oversee everything from forests and wildlife to public waterways and federal lands to climate and energy. We just marked Trump's first 6 months in office, and he has been taking a wrecking ball to all of the progress that we have made on addressing the climate crisis. From empowering big oil to stripping away climate protections to slashing investments in clean energy, so much of what Trump and my Republican colleagues have prioritized falls within our committee's jurisdiction. But it's not just the Inflation Reduction Act or clean energy programs under attack. Trump is going after one of the most fundamental pillars of climate protection that we have, the endangerment finding. Many of you are joining today because you know how critical the endangerment finding is. Put simply, it is the legal foundation for nearly every EPA action to reduce climate pollution. Undermining or revoking the endangerment finding threatens EPA's ability to protect us from climate pollution, and the health of our families, communities, and future generations is at stake. Trump and his hand-picked EPA director, Lee Zeldin, are trying to tear all of that apart. In March, Zeldin announced his plan to, quote, review the endangerment finding with the clear goal of undermining or even revoking it altogether. This is extremely dangerous. Without the endangerment finding, we lose the legal foundation to hold polluters accountable for the emissions that are exacerbating climate change. And in my home state of Arizona, we are living through the dire consequences of this. We've had record-breaking heat waves. We just experienced our hottest day of the summer at 118 degrees in early July, 11 degrees above the norm. And our first 90-degree day this year took place in February. Last year, Maricopa County saw 608 heat-related deaths. Rising temperatures are worsening air pollution, straining our healthcare systems, and endangering our most vulnerable neighbors, seniors, kids, people who work outdoors, and especially communities of color where government services are too often lacking. That's why the endangerment finding is so important. It allows the EPA to address the pollution that is fueling these deadly heat waves and making our air less safe to breathe. In Congress, I am fighting back against Trump and Republicans' efforts to dismantle climate measures and environmental protections, while also working on legislation to tackle extreme heat, invest in clean energy, and lower costs for us across the board. But we all have to do this together. Please contact your member of Congress, stay engaged, submit comments to the EPA, and thank you again to everyone for being here. I will turn it back over to you all to teach everyone how to make our voices heard at EPA.
Another big thank you to Congresswoman Ansari for joining us and for sharing a little bit about her state and why this matters as a young legislator. I know some folks are using the chat, so feel free to comment where you're joining in from, why this matters to you. Obviously, we're going to be talking about that a lot more as we start writing our comments, but it's great to see people interacting in the chat. So first, we want to talk about what the endangerment finding is. It's not necessarily something you hear about every day, but it's the legal and scientific foundation of EPA's ability to protect us and future generations from the impacts of climate warming pollution. Obviously, this is really, really important for the way that we regulate fossil fuels and greenhouse gases that cause climate pollution. This was issued in 2009 in response to the Supreme Court determining that greenhouse gases should be governed under the Clean Air Act. And the Clean Air Act is our nation's bedrock environmental legislation. After EPA's research back in 2009, they found that climate pollution endangers the health and welfare of current and future generations because of its ability to dangerously heat the planet. So all the way back in 2009, the research was clear. There was scientific consensus that this is important and that the EPA has a mission to protect human health and the environment, and thus they must protect us from climate pollution. But this effort to roll back and rescind the endangerment finding has become a political stunt, and many of the folks that have worked at EPA for a long time as scientists and career staff that weren't politically appointed by the Trump administration are not supportive of rescinding this as well, because obviously they believe in the science and the precedent that's already been set. So it's exciting to see so many scientists and doctors on here tonight, but we'll talk a little bit more about all those impacts relevant to these different groups in a bit. So the current threat to the endangerment finding started on Trump's first day of office. He signed a slew of executive orders directing EPA, one of which directed EPA to review the endangerment finding. And then last week, they made that attempt official. So again, rescinding the endangerment finding would sabotage EPA's ability to regulate our largest sources of climate pollutions, such as transportation, power plants, oil and gas operations. So these are things like the Clean Cars Rule, the Clean Trucks Rule, the power plant carbon rule, and the methane rule. And the Trump administration is doing this as, again, a political stunt. They've politicized EPA's mission of protecting human health and the environment instead of that are taking cues from fossil fuel insiders and wealthy corporations. So the way that EPA is set up is that they have political appointees like Lee Zeldin, who Trump appointed and who runs the agency now. And And then there are non-political career staff, like scientists, like I mentioned earlier. But unfortunately, a lot of those scientists and career staff that have been working hard to protect us for decades have been laid off, put on administrative leave, and folks are coming in and denying climate change. And they're doing things like trying to rescind the endangerment finding and really desecrating an agency meant to protect all Americans, regardless of political party. So what we're going to do tonight is write public comments to the EPA. This is a legally required part of the EPA's decision-making process. It's a formal mechanism for us to express our opinion on a proposed government action, in this case, a regulatory action from EPA. The agencies must read them, and then they become public via docket. So a docket is basically an online file that is publicly accessible. I'll send the link to everyone after this for you to submit it. So just as you're sharing your story and thinking about how climate change has impacted you, just remember this will be publicly accessible, and folks from the government will be able to look at it. And that's not to scare anyone. There's been plenty of people that have testified before and lots of kids as well, but you should understand where your story will be. And the reason that we're joining tonight is to create custom comments. So we want people to tell their own story instead of just sending a template form email to the EPA over and over again. So as folks are able to demonstrate very different, authentic lived experiences, this is really what moves our lawmakers. It not only shows that people are willing to put time and energy into this and that they're watching, but it also builds moral and emotional urgency, appealing to people's, sense of humanness. And hopefully it'll sway decision makers by weaving together both the stories that each of us have and the facts that are clear. So over the years, Moms Clean Air Force and our partners, like the ones tonight, I'll give them all a shout out later in the program as we have our expert panel, but we've sent millions of comments to EPA through the written docket, through petitions, and through testimonies. And again, the difference between a written comment and a testimony is just that a written comment is submitted online in written form, and a testimony is recited orally in front of the EPA. And we'll give you the opportunity to do both of those, but focusing on the written comment now because it's a little bit simpler, it's more accessible. And then after this, we'll also share a petition that you can share with your friends, which is a really, really easy way for everyone to just put their name on something that matters to them. They don't have to really do anything besides write their name and their address down, and it'll send a formatted template email about why this matters to the EPA. So to get into it, the template for writing your comment, again, we want this to be unique to you. You can start pulling out a pen and paper right now, open up a Google Doc, but hopefully this is a really easy way to make your voice heard at the EPA. So it's just 4 steps. You're going to write an introduction. We'll give you a template for that. It's going to have the clear ask that we do not want EPA to rescind the endangerment finding. Following that, you're basically going to back that up with your story and incorporating the relevant facts to your story. And then you'll conclude it again by saying, this really matters. EPA needs to protect us and they should not rescind the endangerment finding. And so when I like to write these, I try to think of each of these 4 bullets as a paragraph. They can be as long or as short as you'd like. If you plan to give oral testimony in the future, you'll have about 3 minutes, which is about 450 words. So that would be the limit orally, but in written comments, you can make them as long as you would like. But again, take out a piece of paper or a doc and we'll get started. But first, I'm super excited to share a video of some of our Kids Clean Air Force members giving public testimony. And what they're reading is just another form of written comments. So this is just inspiration to everyone and a reminder that even your kids can testify, they can write public comments, they can show up and make their voices heard as well.
My name is V.
And my name is Tali. We're 9 and 12 and we're from Maryland.
We want the EPA to preserve the endangerment finding to protect our health and future from climate change.
Earlier this month, our town flooded with 5 inches of rain all at once, and our basement flooded. I even saw a car face down in the water and someone had to be rescued. It was really scary.
Our generation is expected to live through 3 times more climate disasters than our grandparents. EPA, do your job to protect us. Protect the endangerment finding.
It's always great to hear from kids that are making their voices heard, but it's another reminder that they shouldn't have to do this. So it's great that all of these adults are here tonight, standing up for them and standing up for their future. But again, what they just said, their introduction, their story, their facts, and their conclusion is exactly what we will help you submit to the EPA's written docket during this webinar. But next, I'm excited to introduce Sofia Mora Ortega, who has been interning with Moms Clean Air Force this summer. She recently testified at EPA for the first time. She submitted written comments like we're doing tonight. So she's going to talk about what that experience was like and how you can do it as well.
Hi, everyone. As Sam mentioned, thanks, Sam. I'm Sophia. I'm a college student, and this summer I've been Moms Clean Air Force's environmental research and policy intern. And much like these adorable young kids, part of Kids Clean Air Force, it's very clear that anyone can do this. When I was really excited during the testimonies to see people of all generations testifying, all backgrounds with all these different stories. So hopefully I can say a little bit about how we can get to that point for all of you. So of course, we're going to start off with an introduction where you're going to mention what your name is and where you're from. During the testimony, they asked you, if you're like speaking it, they asked you to spell out your name, but that's like a minor detail. This would also be a good point to mention if you're part of any organizations related to climate or anything that you feel relevant to your background. And then you would say that you urge the EPA to not rescind the endangerment finding because it is crucial to protect our communities and future generations from the impacts of climate warming pollution. And of course, you can change up the wording to whatever feels most comfortable to you, but the most important thing is to introduce yourself and give a very clear ask to not rescind the endangerment finding. You can go to the next slide. Yes. And so next is what I would say is the most impactful part of these comments and testimony, when everyone has the opportunity to share their own story, their own experiences that are unique to themselves. And so this would be why people care about climate change and how it's already affected them, their families, and how it will impact them in the future. So a common thing or theme that we see in these testimonies or comments is how people speak on extreme weather events that have impacted them or their loved ones. This includes wildfires, air pollution, floods, hurricanes, tornadoes, blizzards, extreme heat, droughts, mental health impacts, eco-anxiety, and there are things like asthma that can be brought into this because of poor air quality. Also, people speak to the cost of rising insurance prices, medical bills. There are so many different ways that you can interweave things that have impacted you. And we have more details on that coming, but generally you just want to speak to your own experience and what's relevant to you. Further, just thinking of specific experiences that you've had with extreme weather that might have been worsened by climate change, health impacts, economic costs, as I sort of mentioned. Consider how climate change impacts different communities and demographics unequally. What are the broader impacts? There's a history of redlining that has led to a lot of minority communities being unfairly subjugated to the impacts of climate change, which is important to address and mention, and determine if you or someone close to you is experiencing eco-anxiety or any mental health impacts from the climate crisis, because that's something that often is overlooked, that people mention a lot, the health impacts, without really focusing on mental health, which is equally as big of a role. And so I had the pleasure of reading a lot of the testimony that some of our moms have written. And in doing so, these were some of the highlights or most, I would say, touching, impactful examples from those. So I'll just read them for you guys to get a sense of storytelling. In 2024, Las Vegas endured 7 consecutive days with temperatures above 115 degrees, and nearly 500 Nevadans lost their lives to heat-related causes. And that comes from Mary in Nevada. Every day, I have to take extra precautions for my daughter living with multiple sclerosis. As research suggests, ground level ozone caused by high temperatures can trigger MS flares and even increase the risk of MS. That comes from Janie. And as a social worker, I know the rise in the number and severity of floods exacerbated by climate change disproportionately affects low-income families. That comes from Candy. And from Kareen in Iowa, we keep experiencing ever-increasing severe storms. I'm often filled with anguish when I think about what my daughter's lives will be like. So as you can see, people are talking about the different impacts from a generational perspective, from a health perspective, from all these different extreme weather examples. And as you saw, it's a great opportunity to bring in your families. A lot of times, if kids don't feel comfortable testifying by themselves, it can be really impactful to just have them by your side or have them submit a drawing or any sort of thing that speaks to their own experience through the comments docket. So, yes. So we're going to keep talking how we can incorporate the facts. Climate change, as we may or may not know, is caused by greenhouse gases, which of the most known ones and impactful ones are carbon dioxide or methane that are emitted from the burning of fossil fuels, coal, oil, gas for energy. These gases trap heat in the Earth's atmosphere, which warms the planet, supercharging dangerous extreme weather. And what the Endangerment Finding does is designate greenhouse gases as pollutants under the Clean Air Act, making the EPA responsible for protecting Americans from the health of, and impacts of related to climate change. So courts have rejected multiple times any legal challenges that have come across to the endangerment finding. And it was originally put in place in 2009. So we have a long history of it, working to, minimize how much climate pollution we have. So we need to keep up this good work and make sure that we're not conceding because they haven't won yet. And we still have this protection and we need to maintain it for as long as possible.
Thanks, Sophia. Yeah, it's really helpful to hear your perspective as someone that has just recently testified for the first time. And it's a great reminder that, again, the reason that we're all here is because we are trying to preserve the endangerment finding. It has not gone away yet. They have not rescinded it yet. And we're going to do everything in our power to make sure that they don't do that. And I think that's a really important reminder when we go through all of these facts that can be a bit scary. So right now, I'm just going to take a brief pause and drop a link in the chat. So basically, we made a one-page document for you all to have when you leave this webinar so that in case you didn't finish your written comment, you can go reference it. It's sort of like a summary of all of the slides that we have here. So you can pull that up, and just in case you wanted to see something earlier, you wanted to see the template for how to write a public comment, you can go click that link and we will send it out to everyone after the webinar as well. But basically right now, I'm going to go through a bunch of facts about the endangerment finding, about climate change, about extreme weather, and you should just pick out the ones that are most relevant to your personal story. And before we do this, I just want to flag one thing to be careful of. So there is a big difference between causation and correlation. So we want to try to say things like, these are associated with worsened asthma or worsened wildfires, that sort of thing, instead of necessarily saying that this singular event was caused by climate change or caused by fossil fuels. Although obviously the larger trends indicate that extreme weather is worsening substantially because of climate change, which is driven by greenhouse gases. So the biggest thing here is obviously the health harms that are connected to climate change. Things like asthma, something that I suffer from and millions and millions of Americans suffer from, that is worsened from extreme heat, extreme weather like wildfires. Also worsened seasonal allergies. This is one that people have been talking about a lot lately, and similarly other respiratory illnesses. This is a more surprising one perhaps, but there's also an increased risk of Lyme disease and other tick-borne illnesses because of the way that the species is moving and growing. Heat exhaustion and heat stroke are a big one. The way that I think about this one is thinking about kids' sports in particular. Lots of parents know what it's like when a kid comes home and says that they felt lightheaded at practice, or that someone, threw up at practice. That is an impact that is getting worse because of climate change. Another one is adverse birth outcomes. So low birth weight, stillbirths, pregnancy issues. Those can be connected to climate change as well. And then mental health impacts like eco-anxiety and trauma from weather-related events. And then obviously extreme weather, again, is worsening in intensity and becoming more frequent because of climate change. So in 2024, the US had 27 climate disasters that caused over $1 billion in damage each. I thought this was an incredibly shocking fact. 27 different times we spent over $1 billion in damages because of an extreme weather event. This is a really, really important economic cost to inaction and to rescinding the endangerment finding and to rolling back other climate protections. Another shocking one is that today's children are expected to face over 3 times the number of climate disasters that their grandparents did. Again, lots of really dark, bleak outcomes. If any of these have affected you or your family, it's a really, really powerful and compelling way to talk about climate change, to talk about the impacts and the importance of the endangerment finding. Now I just want to highlight the disproportionate costs to certain communities. So a lot of us talk about environmental justice, environmental injustice. We think about this just as the fact that some communities are hit harder than others. So communities that are lower income, communities of color, often live near more environmental hazards. So that means that they're feeling these things first and worse. You might hear the term fence line communities, frontline communities, things like that. Another one that is related to environmental injustice is communities with fossil fuel and petrochemical facilities. So extreme weather can lead to chemical disasters like explosions and spills, which can cause cancer and other serious illnesses for years following. Chemical disasters also release more climate warming emission, and then this creates a vicious cycle where that continues to fuel global warming that's causing climate change and worsened extreme weather. And this is all just a really important reminder to contextualize that the fossil fuel industry continues to make record profits, and they're putting that into things like trying to rescind the endangerment finding and trying to continue to promote climate denialism. But unfortunately, our health, our communities, and our children's future are paying the price for that. So the endangerment finding is also really important because it supports a lot of other EPA protections that safeguard people from some of the largest sources of climate pollution. So if the endangerment finding is rescinded, many of these other safeguards are threatened as well, potentially, because the endangerment finding has been used as legal justification for other clean air and climate protections. And so you may see in the docket, which again is just the public record for these comments, that is the place that you'll submit your comment to. This ruling on rescinding the endangerment finding is directly connected to transportation. They sort of tied these two regulations together. So the transportation industry accounts for the largest portion of climate pollution in the US as of 2022. It's still the same roughly the same. It's 28% of climate pollution in the US. And so the clean car standards set by the EPA are set to reduce harmful pollution by 7.2 billion metric tons of carbon dioxide. And the clean truck standards are expected to prevent 1 billion tons of greenhouse gas pollution. That is what is currently set. And within this proposal, the effort to rescind the endangerment finding is connected to efforts to rescind these current standards and roll them back, which is going to create massive amounts of climate pollution if they're successful. Relatedly, the EPA also regulates power plant pollution, which is responsible for about 25% of climate pollution in the US. Current protections would avoid over 1.3 billion tons of carbon pollution through 2047. And another one is that the EPA regulates methane from oil and gas operations, which has over 80 times the climate warming power of carbon dioxide. It's roughly 30% of global warming. This is caused by largely human actions such as leaks from oil and gas operations. And the current protections that are threatened under this proposal would sharply reduce methane pollution as well as power plants pollution and transportation pollution. And so the last part here is to write your conclusion. So I'll talk through this really slowly so that you can catch up and work on your personal story and incorporating the facts into those. And again, you can check out the one-page document that we put in the chat earlier. You want to make sure that you cite your sources. So definitely go to that one-page document and click on the resources in there so that you can figure out where exactly the facts that you're using came from, and you can cite those so that the EPA has record of those citations. It makes your overall comment more compelling. It makes you look like you've done your research, which obviously you all have by being here. So you want to make sure that those are all justifiable claims. And the more research that the EPA has access to, the better. But basically, your last paragraph, your last sentence is going to reiterate your position that you do not want the EPA to rescind the endangerment finding. And you want to close it out by encouraging EPA to do their job, which, again, their mission is to protect human health and the environment. By rescinding the endangerment finding, they would be straying far away from that. And we want to just remind them that they need to be centering people instead of polluters. So again, I'll take a pause, take a look at our one-page document. You're welcome to write this verbatim. So that example in the introduction, in the conclusion, you can just write these exact sentences. The important part of your testimony is really in the middle, where you're sharing your story, how it's impacted you, your family, your kids, your communities, what you worry about into the future, and then incorporating the facts into that. Awesome. And now we're going to move into our expert panel. We're going to be a few minutes early for this. We're just moving quickly through things. So I'll wait for those panelists to pop on. But again, take a look at that one-page document for after this. These experts are going to answer a bunch of important questions. But really what we've taught you tonight is the foundation of advocacy. So writing comments, testifying, giving speeches, these are all done by basically weaving together your personal story and the facts of the matter. So you can do that if you want to go talk to your neighbors as well. It's the basis of all relational organizing. You basically can just go talk to your friends, your neighbors about the things that you care about and try to figure out why they might care about them too. So that's what we're doing with this whole process. I'm sure that our lovely panelists will talk more about that. But it's nice to see all of you here. Thank you for being here. I'm just going to give a quick shout out to all of our partners since you guys only cover some of them. We had some really wonderful partners help put this together to help spread it to their networks. They're all doing really, really fantastic work. But thank you to our partners at the American Public Health Association, Children's Environmental Health Network, Climate Action Campaign. Thank you, Maddie. Climate Psychiatry Alliance. Thank you, Dr. Cooper. Climate Psychology Alliance, Elders Climate Action Network, Environmental Defense Fund, Green Latinos. Thank you, Mace. Medical Society Consortium on Climate and Health. Thank you, Dr. Patel. And Young Gifted and Green. Thank you, Latricia. So welcome and thanks again for being here. We're really excited to have you. So I'm just going to ask each of you to give yourselves a brief introduction when you answer your first question so that we don't have to go around and introduce everyone individually. I want to make sure that you can do yourselves justice. But thank you. Thank you. Because of you, we're all going to be able to better understand what's at stake with the Trump administration's threat to the endangerment finding. All of you have really, really unique bases of climate advocates, so you'll be able to talk about the different ways that this might be impacting folks. And hopefully these remarks are able to help shape folks' public comments. So as you're listening to the experts, take notes on the things that they're saying. If they resonate with you, if you hear something that is impacting you or your community, incorporate that into your testimony. And then you can even do your own little Google search if you hear a fact that they state and you want to put it in your testimony as well. But Dr. Patel, thanks again for being here. I'm going to ask you a question first. And again, please introduce yourself and then you can answer the question. But when it comes to attacks on the endangerment finding, what is at stake for children's health specifically? How does extreme heat and air pollution impact things like pregnancy and birth outcomes? How does wildfire smoke impact children's growing bodies?
And I have 2 minutes, right?
Quick summary.
I'm Dr. Lisa Patel. I'm the Executive Director for the Medical Society Consortium on Climate and Health, which brings together 58 major medical societies understanding climate change is a profound threat to our health and our well-being. And I'm also a practicing pediatrician. I'm a clinical associate professor of pediatrics at Stanford University. I also call myself an unfortunate wildfires expert. It's an expertise that I've developed because it was needed, not that I dreamt as a little girl of becoming one. But I worked in a small hospital, a small community hospital where I care for premature infants, newborns, and then children who are sick enough to be hospitalized. What I've learned, both from my work in climate change and from my clinical practice, is that we see the ground realities of what wildfires mean in terms of children's health. So wildfire smoke, we estimate to be 10 times as toxic as the regular air pollution we breathe. And I'm actually currently in Maine, where we are experiencing poor air quality from the Canadian wildfires that are blowing down. And so what we know happens during periods of wildfire events, we do see, to your point, we don't have the exact attribution science done yet, but we do see higher rates of premature birth and of low birth weight infants when it comes to wildfire smoke, with some emerging evidence around stillbirth. Children, particularly younger than 5, their airways are smaller, so small amounts of irritation or inflammation can put them into big trouble in terms of their breathing. So we see more children that are coming to the hospital with trouble breathing, respiratory issues, bronchitis, pneumonia, asthma, for example. And then in terms of taking kind of a big picture approach as to how we think about climate change and health, I like to say that climate change and the evidence is mounting day by day. Climate change will be the greatest driver for the health of a child born today. And we are already seeing that play out, both in terms of extreme heat, wildfire advisories, floods that are destroying communities, displacement, and then my wonderful colleague, Dr. Cooper, will talk about the mental health effects as well. So that's why the endangerment finding is so important. It's critical that we mitigate the effects of climate change to protect children's health.
Thank you, Dr. Patel. That was a great summary. I really appreciate the fact that there are so many doctors on the line tonight. It's really important that our doctors and our medical system knows about the health harms of climate impacts so that they can better take care of people. So thank you for speaking to that. And I'll just invite the folks that are here tonight. You can drop questions into the comment section, and we'll be fielding those once I get done with the round of questions for each of our panelists. I know that there will be some good ones, but I'm sure we'll come back to you, Dr. Patel. Thank you. Over to you, Dr. Cooper from the Climate Psychiatry Alliance. Climate change and air pollution are obviously intersecting issues like we've talked about. We know that both have profound impacts on mental health. This is something I experience. I'm sure a lot of us on this call are experiencing that as well. We know that the proposal to rescind the endangerment finding also proposes rescinding greenhouse gas limits for motor vehicle tailpipes, like the transportation rules that I was talking about earlier, which would slow down the transition to electric vehicles and increase tailpipe pollution that's really harmful to breathe as well. So broadly speaking, what's at stake for our mental health when it comes to this proposal to rescind the endangerment finding?
Thanks so much, Sam, for having me here and being able to address the impacts on mental health and the brain about emissions. They're really very significant. I am the president of Climate Psychiatry Alliance and also one of the co-founders. We address the mental health impacts of climate change, and I also am an associate clinical professor at the University of California, San Francisco, and I'm a 40 years of clinical practice in doing psychotherapy and psychiatry. So, but today I'm going to address some of the most important things that are impacted by this particular attempt to rescind the endangerment finding and the standards that we're talking about. And Sam, you've already mentioned that there's eco-anxiety in the realm of climate change, but I'm going to expand this quite dramatically. The mental health impacts go way beyond that. I'm feeling really troubled by the world we live in. And the impacts of emissions on mental health have climate change and emissions have profound impacts on brain functioning and mental health. Our brains are the driving engine of our thoughts, ability to think, our behavior, and our emotions, and all are impacted by these emissions, particularly vehicle emissions that are included in this rollback. So although the impacts on mental health are vast and quite diverse, I'm going to address only two of those. Air pollution. Air pollution is widely known to be a health impact on lung and cardiovascular illness, but what's less known is the impact on the brain. These tiny pollutant particles, PM 2.5 and tinier, are so tiny that we actually breathe them in directly in our olfactory apparatus, our nose. Just breathing, the essence of life, brings particles directly into our brain and causes brain damage. And that brain damage multiplies existing neuropsychiatric disorders across the entire lifespan, from fetal development to old age. It increases it impairs fetal brain development, attentional, cognitive, behavioral, and learning impairments in children. And in the elderly, it accelerates dementia, higher rates of stroke are seen, and other neurodegenerative processes, as well as greater depression, anxiety, and even suicide across all age groups. The wide range of sources of air pollution, and there are many, but vehicular emissions are particularly significant. One shocking example is a study of children's brain autopsy, death from other causes, showing that children living near high transportation routes have evidence of early Alzheimer's markers compared to children who are less exposed. Repeating that, children already at young ages have early evidence of beginning Alzheimer's precursors and brain impacts. I'm going to shift to heat. Many are sweltering this summer in high heat places, and there are direct heat impacts on mental health, behavior, cognition, and sleep because of extreme heat. This is worldwide. It's likely due to biological impacts on the brain. But what do we see? Increased irritability. We all get irritable, but more insignificant is increases in aggression and conflict. There are increases in suicide, what I see as aggression turned toward the self, with one researcher even saying that there are likely projected 21,000 additional suicides due to heat alone by 2050, which wipes out all of the combined impacts of suicide prevention programs and gun control. Impaired sleep. None of us sleep well when it's very hot. And impaired sleep has many, many drivers of impaired functioning for all of us and has profound impacts on cognitive troubles, such as impaired concentration, impaired attention, impaired thinking, cognitive functions. It bodes very poorly for learning, especially for kids, making decisions, and contributes to increases in workplace accidents. We also see increases in depression and anxiety with increased emergency room visits and hospitalizations, and particularly for those with mentally ill pre-existing disorders, we see massive difficulties. Mentally ill die at upwards of 3 times the rate of those without mental illnesses during extreme heat. And of course, hospitalizations and increase in symptoms increase. It is not a good moment to roll back the tools that we have in our toolkit. It is now a time to make a profound stand against these rollbacks. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Cooper. That was so informative. I'm sure that each of these panelists could give a whole webinar themselves on these impacts. So thank you for condensing that all down. And I'll invite one of my colleagues to drop our mental health fact sheet into the chat as well, if we have access to that, just so that folks can get access to, you know, more of the data and the citations for a lot of what you just talked about. But thank you for all of the research that you're doing and for bringing folks together to make sure that we're talking about the mental health impacts. I know it's especially impacting my generation and future generations. As a member of Gen Z, a lot of folks talk about, you know, wanting to have kids or not, and whether climate change is impacting that.
Big concern. There's a lot more to talk about.
Yeah, I know it's a whole can of worms, but maybe someone will ask a question about it later. But thank you for that. I'm going to go over to Latricia. I'll invite you again to introduce yourself, your organization. But my question for you is, what's at stake specifically for young people of color in the US with the attacks on the Endangerment Finding? How does climate change amplify and magnify existing inequalities and injustices in this country?
Thank you so much for that question. And again, Latricia Adams, founder, CEO, and president of Young, Gifted, and Green, and proudly former White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council appointee with the previous administration. So there is definitely a lot at stake for our young people, particularly for young people of color that have already experienced legacy pollution in frontline communities, specifically when we hone in on air pollution. So research indicates that specifically those individuals who live in frontline communities, particularly Black and Latino communities, experience intense or increased risk of respiratory disease, for example. Actually, in fact, about 71% of African Americans live in counties in the US that are currently in violation of federal air pollution standards in comparison. So when you think about the potential rollback of this monumental endangerment finding, it definitely puts already vulnerable communities at risk. Additionally, some more kind of facts. Air pollution was linked to about 709,000 deaths in children under the age of 5 back in 2021. And from a global perspective, about 15% of global deaths result from issues surrounding respiratory health issues. Also, studies have shown that children with asthma miss approximately 14 million days of school. I'm going to repeat that. Children with asthma miss approximately 14 million days of school each year due to respiratory issues such as asthma, that of course is exacerbated by air pollution. In addition to that, particularly when you talk about school age children, that also has implications for parents and households as well. When you're talking about a sick child, more often than not, at least one parent has to stay home. So that also has implications from an economic perspective. So research also shows that there's about an estimation that parents lose about $3.8 billion annually due to children's asthma related absenteeism. So this is not just a public health crisis that is upon us, it also is an economic crisis on top of inflation and all the other things that are happening at the current moment. In addition to that, with the endangerment finding, it's going to make it extremely difficult, even at the local level, to advocate, particularly as it relates to permitting. For example, there's going to be implications even from a democracy perspective when, for example, you make public comment around zoning. Even at a local level, you won't have this body of work that supports you from the endangerment finding to really advocate for our most vulnerable communities. And then the last thing that I will touch on is about reproductive health and maternal health. So even, with trying to conceive, exposure or increased exposure to air pollution does have negative implications on conception. Even if you are able to conceive, it makes it even harder. So issues such as preterm birth, low birth weight, all associated with increased risk with air pollution. So knowing that there is this proposal to roll this back, it really pretty much is damning. Even before, you make it into the world, it puts disproportionately people of color at risk, and making it really difficult to have healthy and thriving families. And it begs the question, what are we leaving to our children? We're inheriting, our children are inheriting the earth from us, right? So it definitely reemphasizes and amplifies this whole conundrum with gloom and doom, which is associated not just with climate change, but also with the pollution that exacerbates some of these issues.
Yeah. Thank you, Latricia. All super important points, especially on the asthma front. I know almost every family in America can relate to having a kid, a grandparent, a parent having asthma, and those impacts, can derail people's lives. It's something I've struggled with throughout my life and know that it really heavily impacted my parents. And obviously now too, thinking about recent cuts to health insurance accessibility in this country, that impacts young people as well as older people. It impacts everyone. And revoking and rescinding the endangerment finding has the potential to make it easier to get sick and harder to get better. So that's a really, really challenging place to be. And we're just really appreciative that you're all here tonight to talk about the impacts, and for all of the folks online ready to write their comments. But next, I want to turn it over to you, Maysay. And again, folks can drop questions in the chat. We'll field those in a little bit. But what's at stake for Latino communities, specifically in the US, with the endangerment under threat? How are Latino communities uniquely vulnerable to extreme weather events?
Yeah, definitely. Hola a todos. My name is Maysay Gonzalez, and I'm an environmental justice advocate based in Salt Lake City, Utah, and currently Green Latinos climate justice and air quality advocate. I have a background in working on environmental justice, specifically when it comes to air quality at both state and federal levels. And I think to answer this question, I need to kind of share a little bit of my story to help those understand what's at stake for many Latinos. I was raised in Salt Lake City, Utah, in one of their historically redlined areas of the city. Like many Latino community members and frontline members across the country, we lived just a block away from a highway. A power plant was my view with the mountains, and infrastructure like landfills was in our area. Today, that story is still true for far too many of our families living near rail yards, ports, refineries, or waste facilities. And in Utah specifically, it meant growing up with some of the worst ozone and PM 2.5 pollution during the winter time. You can see this in our asthma rates. I missed school many times because of it. There's warnings to stay inside. If you ever come to Salt Lake City and you drive our highway, sometimes the big highway signs say drive less, which is kind of funny when you're already driving to work, to better the air quality. And you can, of course, feel it in your chest when the inversion rolls in. And at Green Latinos, to kind of bring that together, we use the Latino climate justice framework to make sense of some of these overlapping harms. It's a community-built roadmap that ties together health, climate, and justice. And it reminds us that those impacts aren't isolated, they're systemic. So just some points that we have in the Latino climate justice framework to show the impact is 1.6 million Latinos live near oil and gas wells. Latino families that pay 24% more of energy than white households, yet nearly a third of us don't have air conditioning. And you can read more of these pieces on our website, but some of those even show that our communities, especially children, have higher rates of asthma and less access to healthcare due to just systemic policies that have happened in the past. So when it comes to endangerment finding being threatened, it's not just a rollback of policy, it's really a rollback of protection. It strips away one of the most powerful tools we have to require and to work with the government to act on climate pollution. Without it, the legal obligation for the EPA just isn't there anymore to regulate pollutants that are driving extreme heat, wildfires, what we've seen in Texas, which was devastating to a lot of our community members, and down to things like toxic air pollution that is hurting us, hurting everyone on a day-to-day basis. So the endangerment finding isn't just a political detail, it's really a backbone of climate accountability in this country. And weakening it puts polluters in a way back in the driver's seat and tells a lot of our communities that you're on your own, which is really unfortunate.
Yeah, totally. I think you put that really well, and your story is really compelling. And I'll just say, that is how you write written comments, right? You talk about your story, you talk about the facts. That was a fantastic example and really moving. So appreciate your willingness to share and give an example for all the folks in the audience as well. I know the air conditioning issue is also an issue that a lot of folks face. So if that's relevant to you, if you live in a state that traditionally hasn't gotten that hot and now it does, folks in the Northeast, in the Pacific Northwest, haven't had to have air conditioning if it was available to them at all. And now they do because it gets so hot because of the way that global warming and climate change are impacting weather patterns and causing extreme heat. So thanks for sharing all of that. Maddie, I'm going to go to you last, but thank you also for being here. I'll let you introduce yourself and CAC's great work, but CAC recently held your extreme weather hearings in North Carolina and in Arizona, highlighting the impacts of recent hurricanes and extreme heat in Arizona. So what kind of stories were told at those hearings and what stood out to you? What were the most impactful stories that you heard throughout those hearings?
Thanks so much for that question. Thanks also for my fellow panelists for their expertise and shedding a light on what this dangerous attack means for people across the country. My name is Maddie Page, and I'm the Government Affairs Director at the Climate Action Campaign. And the Climate Action Campaign is a coalition of environmental justice, and public health organizations across the country. We have over 15 million members and work on federal climate policy. Like others have said so far tonight, with this proposal, President Trump and Zeldin are attempting to abandon the responsibility that EPA has to protect people from the pollution that causes climate change. This would give polluters free rein to pollute And it's a clear indication that they're trying to make climate denial official US policy. But we know that there's no denying the dangers of climate change. Communities across the country are reeling from costly and deadly disasters like the floods in Texas, the most expensive disaster ever in Los Angeles with the fires and the heat dome that hit so many people this summer. So like you said, Sam, we have been working on these people's hearings with partners across the country. So I've been on the road, and we've been working to help communities that have been hit by climate disasters share their stories. So, these people's hearings are really a chance to give survivors and other community members a platform to shape the narrative about what's at stake with these rollbacks. And make it crystal clear to decision makers what the consequences are. So like you said, we held events in Asheville and Phoenix, and this weekend we're going to hold one in Los Angeles. And one common thread that I've really been hearing from folks is just the desire to make it clear that climate change is here now, and that it could happen to, like, these types of disasters could happen to any community. And folks really want to make sure that what happened or is happening to their towns and families doesn't happen to another community. In Asheville, one resident talked about how she's, across her lifetime living in different places across the country, experienced multiple hurricanes, fires, tornadoes. And despite living through all that, she considers herself lucky, because she's lucky to be alive when she has so many neighbors that will never return, who have passed away because of these events. Another resident didn't have food or shelter or clean water for days. We heard from a firefighter in Asheville that talked about what it was like to be part of the rescue team. But we also heard from everyday people who were heroes too, like a neighbor who had to swim with an oxygen tank above their head to be able to deliver it to a neighbor who had run out of oxygen. And in Arizona, like you said, the discussion really focused on deadly heat. And heat is the deadliest kind of extreme weather that we face in this country. In Phoenix, people talked about losing loved ones, students whose childhoods are forever changed by the instability of climate change, veterans, outdoor workers, and the loved ones of outdoor workers who have to carry on despite hazardous and deadly conditions. So you mentioned what's at stake here, and I think it's more stories like these, and even worse. And like I said, the administration's denial can't change the facts. Extreme weather is here, it's killing us, and it's destroying entire communities across the country. We have to keep fighting against these proposals, because our lives depend on it.
Yeah. Thank you, Maddie. Thanks for sharing those stories. I would encourage folks to talk again to their neighbors, to their friends, their family, and hear what impacts are going on in their lives, because it's impacting far more people than we think or we talk about. But I'll also add too that if you feel like your story isn't that dramatic or it isn't compelling enough, that's definitely not true. Everyone's story is really important, and it's impacting all of us in different ways that are really powerful to tell. And the more people that are talking about this and sharing how it's affecting them in any way, shape, or form, the better. But thank you to all of you for answering those first round of questions. I'm going to turn to the chat and answer a couple of quick logistical questions that seem very important for everyone to hear about. And then I'll turn it back to you all for some more questions. But the first one, what's the deadline for submitting comments? It's September 15th, so you've got some time. You can write as much as you want for those written comments. The public hearing, where you could recite your public comment, is going to be on August 19th and 20th. I'll talk about that at the end of this. The slides and recording for this will be available on our YouTube afterwards. We'll share the link for everyone that's registered. And then another one, does climate pollution mean greenhouse gases? Yes, it does. greenhouse gases from fossil fuels, things like methane and carbon dioxide, are causing climate change and are called climate pollution for short. Another one in here, is there a greater need for oral or written comments? That's a really good question. They are supposed to be treated equally. So if you submit them, they have to read them and they have to treat them equally. I think it can be really compelling to, speak up and recite your public comment in front of the EPA verbally, because they'll have a panel of EPA officials that listen to you. So if you're available at that time, I would encourage people to come to that hearing. It's a really empowering experience. But again, written comments are just as powerful and just as important. Turning it back to the panelists, I think this is a really important one, but how do you maintain hope when the news about climate feels really discouraging? Does anyone want to kick us off with that one? You seem like the right person to answer that one.
It is a question that have been asked so many times, and it depends on what you think hope is. And I want to just acknowledge that Joanna Macy, who has been a leader in the environmental outspoken way of engaging with climate change, has spoken about hope too. And she died just a week and a half ago or so. And she's been a leader and a guide to all of us with a Buddhist perspective. And for her, she talks very much about how engaging with the profound knowledge and experience about the horrors that we're facing and the sense of grief that we experience with that, it are not feelings to be fearful of, that they are feelings actually that represent our attachment and our love of the world. And out of that, we can tolerate the horrific feelings that we have about what we're actually facing. And hope then gets put into a smaller realm. For me, hope means the ability to engage in the actions that I see now for problems that truly exist, regardless of whether I think I'm going to win or lose, particularly on this one. It is not connected with the outcome, with success. It is connected with using our activity now in community and with other people to experience a way of having meaning in our lives on something very important. And for me, as a Jewish woman who grew up with the Holocaust in the background, my age group, I don't believe ever that those really, really brave souls who stood up against the Nazis actually thought that they were going to win. Hitler seemed too powerful. And that sticks with me as you do the right thing, and out of the energy of what we do, we experience a hopefulness.
Thank you. That's really, really insightful, Dr. Cooper. And I'll just add to this too, that we mentioned this earlier in the slides before, but there have been challenges to the endangerment finding before, and they have not succeeded. So this is just another attempt, and precedent has shown us that we can win this one. And that's why it's really important that we're doing everything that we can to make sure that we do win. And I'll touch on a point in the chat as well, a couple points in the chat actually. One is the importance of submitting these written comments. So again, they become public record. So that is used in the future lawsuits around the endangerment finding. People will reference your comments, people will reference the number of comments, the expert technical comments. All of that is really important for the legal fights that will proceed. And then another comment in the chat that I wanted to...
Sam, I'm going to just flip the question on hope. It is very clear that we are hopeless if we don't act.
Yes, that's a great way to put it. Yeah, Thank you. I will also just add to that. I think people are talking in the chat about hope and joy are the only way to keep us going, but creativity is as well. And one way that you can be creative in this is that you can submit photos of your kids, of your families, of your kid with an inhaler, of wildfire smoke. You can submit that with your comment. So that can be really compelling as well. You can show up to the public hearing when you may recite your public comment if you would like to, and you can change it to be your background of your kids and of your family. You could have your kids make artwork and send it to your elected officials. You can put it into the docket. Lots of ways to be creative, and it is super important as we continue this fight. Another question I wanted to ask the group is if anyone has advice for young people navigating a world where the future of climate and our health and our general future is so uncertain, like we've talked about.
I can speak briefly to that. I think one of the things that is really critical is that youth actually make comments. So one of the things that Young, Gifted, and Green spends a significant amount of time on is training and providing support to young people. And I say young people, even as young as middle school students, to be able to come into spaces and ensure that their voices are heard. They can do it. I'm a K through 12 educator by trade. I spent 16 years in the K through 12 education system, and I can definitely attest that young people can very well speak truth to power. We need them to continue this fight. You know, unfortunately, we don't know if we'll be able to see the promised land, right? But it's important that we sow good seeds in our children and our youth. But it's important for us to give them space to be able to advocate and to speak for themselves. And part of that does involve teaching. It is, you know, making sure that our young people understand both the technical aspects of what's at stake, but then also understanding the infrastructure, right? With what is the federal registry? What are the rules in which you're supposed to submit your various comments? So it's a lot of opportunities for a teachable moment to ensure that we are building the capacity of the next generation of climate and environmental justice leaders.
Yeah, thank you so much for all the work you do on that front, Latricia. It's super important. And you know, we saw those kids earlier, V and Natalia from Maryland. They've testified before, they'll testify again. And kids can do it, and kids usually know the right things to say and to do. And sometimes they are the ones that need to be reminding our legislators, because maybe they will listen to kids more than they'll listen to us sometimes. But I want to open it up to the group to just ask if anyone else has advice for young people, advice for any of our attendees, just advice in general in this fight that we're all in together.
Yeah, I can jump in for a second. If that's cool.
Yeah.
As someone who is a Gen Z, I feel like I've grown up in what feels very unprecedented crisis one after another, from climate disasters, pandemics, political chaos. It just feels like weight on a shoulder has been on us for a long time. And I feel like when I start to spiral, I just start thinking about like my elders and ancestors. Our communities have faced injustice, displacement, and environmental destruction before, and they still showed up. They still fought to protect what matters. And it just reminds me that we're not starting from zero. There's a lot of people who've paved the way, and we don't have to carry that alone. So that's something that really helps me out. And it's okay to feel overwhelmed. This work is hard, and pretending everything is fine doesn't help anyone. What matters is just to keep going, and keep going doesn't mean to burn out. So sometimes we carry the torch, sometimes we pass it, sometimes we rest, sometimes others hold it for us for a little bit. So making sure to know your own capacity is really important, because burnout is real. So that's just a little advice that I have, and that's been helping me kind of keep going.
Yeah, that's really great advice and really grounding for all of us. Definitely important reminders to make sure that none of us are burning out, but we're all distributing the weight that we feel in this fight. And it's another thank you to all of you for being here. Dr. Patel, were you going to jump in?
Yeah, I just want to build off of what both Latricia and myself said, which is, and this is also to flip the question a little bit, is that when a youth activist or advocate reaches out to you, say yes. Always say yes, because it is a matter of intergenerational justice. It is not fair how much has been placed upon the generations below us. And also what I try to do, it's not to tell them what to do. It is to give them the advice that they need. It is to open spaces for them. It is to make connections for them. But when they reach out, say yes to everybody here that's on this call, because if you're here, you likely have access to some aspects of power in society that gives you an opportunity to help the youth below you. So that's my only additional piece of advice.
I think that's an incredible note to end on. Really appreciate that, and appreciate all of you for taking the time, all of you panelists that have been so wonderful and shared so much wisdom. I'm going to jump back to sort of our next step slides and close us out, but thank you so much again to each of you, and thank you to everyone for being here as well. But I'm going to switch back if I can. Oh, perfect. Thank you. So this is our next steps. This is the end of our webinar, but when you go back and finish up your public comment, you're going to go cite your sources. You're going to use that one-page document that we dropped in the chat earlier and are going to email out. Use that to cite your sources, to finish up your comments, and to submit them. So you're going to submit them at that website. We can drop it in the chat. It's in the one pager. You can Google it. You'll find it. And then we also want to make sure that everyone is amplifying your impact, because it's wonderful that everyone is here, but it's even better if we can get more people here next time and get more people involved in the climate fight in general. And I think there's a real appetite for that right now as people feel more and more powerless, but they want to take more action to take their power back. So we also invite you to get 3 friends to sign our petition, to write comments of their own. And we encourage you to post a quote from your comment on social media. Start sharing your story, talk to your neighbors about your story, bring it up at the dinner table. Any way that you can start these conversations is so important and so impactful. And then one last sort of contextual item is that this is a structure that you can use in the future. So if you want to get involved in local politics, in county politics, in state politics, at any regulatory body, whether that's the EPA, the Department of Energy, all of these different government entities take public comments and testimonies when they're making decisions. It's often a legally required aspect of that. So now you have this new skill, and being able to formulate a story that is compelling and factual is really impactful and should make you feel empowered to go do this at any other hearing that you see online or hear about in your community. So hopefully that is a takeaway that lives long after this webinar. But again, thank you so much for being here. You can leave any additional questions in the comment section right now, or in the link that you'll get from Mobilize as it asks for your feedback. But with that, I will close us out, and thank you again to our panelists, our partners, and to all of our attendees for being here. I hope everyone has a great night.